I don't know what to say. I've been here for so long now. When was it even I got here? I can't seem to remember. My mind feels hazy, as though I'm experiencing everything through an increasingly thick layer of snow, slowly being buried, my senses dulling little by little as I fight to keep myself at the surface, trying to keep it from filling my ears and eyes and mouth. I can't move. I've tried to shift so that my back can stretch, so it won't hurt so badly anymore, but I can't. No matter how much I squirm and wiggle, there is only one position to be had. There's nowhere to go. I need to get out of here. I can't breathe. I can't think. I'm really losing it, aren't I? The Organist's Son. Episode 5. Hanging on the Wall. The air was filled with silence and dust. The quiet thumping of our footsteps, muffled by the carpet below us, was all the sound there was, and around us, decades' worth of dust was moving, catching the bouncing light of the flashlights, transforming the air into a swirling ocean of shining particles. There was paintings on the walls, meticulous works of art so worn and tattered that little remained of what once must have been a splendid collection. As we continued down the corridors, I couldn't help but feel like they were watching me. Hundreds of peeling, painted eyes in ruined sockets following my every move. We'd been walking for maybe half an hour now, in approximately the same direction, though the corridor wound and twisted so much that I wasn't entirely sure. Yet the hallways stretched on, every seeming end to them merely a new turn, a new crossroad. The house we were walking through must be enormous. It was odd, too, that in all the time we'd been walking, we'd never seen an actual room. Huge as it may be, the house lacked all the things that would have made it livable. There were no bedrooms, no kitchen, no bathroom, not even the impractical splendor and show of power of ballrooms and grand halls, the kind of places one would imagine to exist in a house not built for living. Just the same dark passageways, endlessly stretching, blackened paintings, striped wallpaper, and dust. Flynn was walking in front of me, and he kept the pace I struggled to keep up with. He hardly seemed to notice I was falling behind, just stalked on ahead, steps sure, gaze distant. "Do you have any idea where we're going?" I asked, slightly out of breath. "No." Flynn didn't stop for even a second, not even glancing my way. "Is this really the smartest course of action, then? We've been walking for quite some time, and nothing seems to be changing. Besides, we've taken a lot of turns. I'm already not entirely sure I remember the way back." I said it pretty matter-of-factly, but really I was quite worried. Although going out was the exciting part, knowing how to get back felt important. "I've got it covered. I'm good at memorizing stuff like this." Finally he stopped, looking over at me, though it almost seemed a difficult task, his entire being impatiently waiting to take the next step. "Okay, but we should still try to make sure we aren't walking in circles. This hardly seems like a difficult place to get lost." I rummaged through my pockets while I spoke, looking for something unimportant enough to leave behind. My phone, my keys, headphones, wallet, and finally, a receipt from the last time I'd bought groceries. I folded it and placed it in the middle of the corridor. "This way we'll know if we pass by here again." "If we keep walking in the same direction, we won't." "Yes, if this place works like our world. But we technically don't know that it does. Think about it. We got here by walking through a magic door. Maybe getting places is just fundamentally different here." "You're right. Look, I'm sorry I'm being so—" He gestured wildly, not really indicating anything in particular, just substituting the movement for a word. "It's a clever idea. Good thinking." "Thanks." We continued in silence. I found my eyes drifting across the paintings as we passed them, absently scanning the faded landscapes and portraits. They all looked normal enough, scenes of parties, nymphs and satyrs frolicking in elaborate woodlands, emotionless faces, 100 different sunsets, brilliant colors that had lost all saturation and life, leaving behind only a husk of what they once were, having lost the thing that made them beautiful and gave them meaning to time and rot. I ran my finger across one of the frames, a thick golden thing. It came away covered in dust. The painting depicted a table inexplicably standing in the middle of a field that stretched into the horizon. Around it sat various woodland creatures as well as a few people, and they seemed to be merrily enjoying a feast together. It was hard to really see the details of it, as there were many patches where the paint had cracked or blackened, rendering many of the characters faceless. It made the world on the canvas seem darker somehow. All these happy people locked in perpetual celebration and joy, unable to see how their world, and them with it, decayed, rotted away until their endless dance was no longer visible through the grime. How long must it not have taken to make something like this? How many hours spent on a forgotten piece of art, doomed to waste away in this endless hallway? I moved the beam of the flashlight across the canvas, across laughing faces and raised cups. A badger made a toast with a faceless fox. 2 frogs danced on the table. There was an odd shape in the background. It didn't quite seem to belong. Perhaps a stain of some kind. A big blotch of darkness, towering tall behind the characters. In the cracked and blackened lines, I thought for a moment I glimpsed a pair of eyes, as though the stain was the silhouette of a creature, a hulking beast looking down on the party. It was at that moment I realized that the sound of Flynn's footsteps was fading in the distance. I was being left behind. I broke into a run, the light of the flashlight bouncing across dusty carpet, hardly steady enough to illuminate even the ground I stepped on. My footsteps seemed to be far too quiet, pounding in dissonance with my beating heart, too slow, too muffled by the carpet to fill what I with a jolt of terror realized was absolute silence. Shit, I muttered, willing my legs to move faster. If I was fast enough, then maybe I could catch up to Flynn before the corridor split. Then I wouldn't be alone in this maze of corridors, stuck in a world of dust and ruined art that I could not remember how to exit. In the end, I needn't have worried so much. As I turned a corner, there he was. He glared at me as I almost ran into him, but I was too relieved to care about his sour expression. "What happened? Why'd you stop?" he asked, gaze nervously darting between my face and the hall behind me. "I got distracted by one of the paintings," I answered, somewhat embarrassed. He sighed, relaxing a bit, though retaining that constant unrest that seemed to never quite leave his features. "We have to be careful. This place is like a maze. If we lose each other, it might be hard to find the other person again." "Yeah, you're right. Maybe we should make a system where we always stop and check the other person is there when we get to a crossroad. That way, even if someone falls behind, we can always know we're going the same way." "Okay." Flynn began walking anew, and I followed, trying to focus on memorizing the path we were taking. Regardless, my eyes were drawn again and again toward the paintings. Though the subjects and styles were different, I somehow got the sense that there was something eerily similar about them, something that bound them all together. I studied a portrait as I passed it, a young, bored-looking woman in a blue dress. It would have been beautifully crafted if not for the stain that marred the middle of the face, an unsightly blotch that ruined the features. The next one was of a landscape, a pretty hillside overlooking a quaint village. Pretty greens and yellows had long since faded, especially in the middle of the painting. I paused. Something was weird. I backed up, comparing the portrait from before to the landscape. Yes, it looked almost entirely the same, a patch of dark in the middle of the painting. I remembered the painting from before. There'd been a stain on it too, hadn't there? Was this in all of them? I scanned the rest of the paintings as I walked. The scenes varied, playful dances and stern portraits hung side by side. But there was one thing that brought them all together. In all of the paintings, every single one, this dark shadow lingered. It was just a ghost on the canvas, almost imperceptible against the warped and faded colors, but unmistakably there. I stepped closer to one of the paintings, this time focused not on the sunset or the mountains, but the stain. No, it wasn't a stain. That wasn't the right word. That would have implied that it was accidental and featureless, an accident that ruined the painting. Upon closer inspection, it seemed much more deliberate than that. A shape that had been added over the painting itself, a slight shadow of a hulking beast lurking in the background, or warping the features of a face. "Are you coming or what?" Flynn stood a bit further down the corridor, tapping his leg restlessly. "Come and have a look at this." I let my fingers slide across the canvas, feeling the bumps and cracks of paint. Now that I was looking at it, the figure seemed impossible to miss, dark and looming over the landscape, an almost imperceptible threat to the idyllic countryside, a spectre that marred the beauty of the landscape with its haunting presence. I remember being completely captivated, staring so intently at this mysterious thing that seemed almost to exist behind the paint. It almost seemed to be staring back, painted eyes the only real feature in an expressionless face. I could hear Flynn's footsteps coming closer as he walked up behind me. "What is it?" he asked in his usual irritated manner. "Look," I said, pointing at the painting. "At what?" he said, confusion and impatience mingling in his voice. "That silhouette in the background. Do you see it?" He squinted at the painting and tilted his head slightly, a second passing before his eyes widened in recognition. "Oh yeah, I see it. What about it?" "It's in all the paintings." He took a step back, the beam of his flashlight moving from canvas to canvas. "It is. That's weird." "I wonder why," I said. "No clue." He turned, starting to walk again. I followed in silence. Clearly the conversation was over. I felt unease roiling in my stomach. As we took another turn, chose another path, I could never quite seem to shake that feeling, a cloying sense that something was wrong. I tried not to look at the paintings anymore. Really, I tried. But it was impossible not to look, not to notice the figure in the background, not to feel like it was looking back at me. I wondered how I ever could have missed it. It seemed so clear now, contours overtaking the art until it was all there was, this amorphous figure staring back at me. It almost seemed to darken before my very eyes, presence becoming more tangible for every canvas I passed, every second I kept looking, as if the figure was getting closer. We came to a crossroad, and that's when I heard it. The scratching. At first I thought I must be imagining it, a sound straddling the line of perception perfectly, so tiny and minute I thought it must not exist at all. But as we walked down this new corridor, the sound grew louder, slowly increasing in volume. The sound of something ripping, tearing became almost rhythmic as it built, echoed from the walls in a senseless cacophony. And as we came to a halt, a new sound joined the horrible symphony, a wet, moaning gurgle, and together the noise filled the room like twisted music, every part of every surface covered in its agonizing song. "What is that?" Flynn spun in place as he tried to determine what direction it was coming from. For once, his voice lacked the aggressive restlessness that usually permeated it. He just sounded scared. I didn't answer him. My attention focused solely on finding the source of the horrible noise that seemed ever louder, building and building and building towards an inevitable crescendo. My eyes locked on one of the paintings, a city square filled with people, the faded remnants of a myriad vibrant colors still visible in the corners of the piece, though the center had long since been overtaken, the giant shadow of the silhouette swallowing everything that once was where it stood. It was not close to imperceptible now, not hidden behind the paint anymore. No, it stood in sharp contrast to the background, and I couldn't look away, because it was looking back. It almost seemed to be drawing closer as I watched, its bulbous form swallowing more and more of the canvas. I stood, transfixed by the way something that should have been static and constant changed before my very eyes. I stepped closer, stretching out my arm to touch it, my fingers feeling the slightly uneven surface of the paint, eyes still locked on the thing in the painting as it grew. And then the canvas buckled outward, thread groaning as it struggled to stay in place as something pushed against it from the inside. My hand jerked back a bit, but I didn't move, didn't even really feel afraid. There was something mesmerizing about the way that it happened, as though something was at once coming from behind the painting and within it. It was, in a word, entirely otherworldly. The paint was cracking, the canvas splitting apart, warping the world upon it beyond recognition. I was spellbound, unable to tear my eyes from what was tearing its way out of the painting. A hand. No, it wasn't quite a hand, not as you or I have hands. There was something wrong about it, about the way the fingers were placed, in the way they bent, in the way it moved, as though every single detail about it was just the tiniest bit off, the smallest bit inhuman. I wanted to move, but I was stuck, frozen even as it scrambled blindly for purchase, blackened fingernails grazing my outstretched arm for a horrible moment before I finally managed to jerk back. Instead of my arm, the hand found the frame of the painting, the ancient wood splintering under its grip as it pulled itself through. Fuck! I flinched as Flynn grabbed my arm, fingers gripping hard as he pulled me back, away from the thing that made its way out of the painting. It almost looked like a person, and I think that was the worst part. It was tall, in almost the same way as a person is tall. Long limbs just a bit too long and slim, as though this was not the way they ought to look, but something they had been warped into being, like they'd been stretched out, the skin scraped thin across limbs it was not made to cover. At first I thought it had a face, but something seemed wrong about it, for it did not move in the way faces do, the shadows static even as the light of the flashlight slid across it. It was painted on, nose and mouth just a convincing illusion, but the eyes stood out to me. They were real, blinking and wet. There was something I recognized about them, something horribly familiar, though I could not place it though I tried. It took a step forward, slow and unsure, then another, faster, arm stretching out toward me. "What are you doing? Run!" Flynn's voice shook me from my thoughts. While I'd been frozen, he had already taken off, only turning around to yell the warning at me, and I quickly realized just how close the thing had gotten. I ran. There was no consideration of where, just the sounds of my feet against the carpet, my heart pounding loudly in my ears as though it was trying to drown out the sound of the thing chasing me. I didn't look back. I could hear the sound of the being well enough to know it was hot on my trail, footsteps padding across the carpet, moaning, somehow escaping from its painted lips. I could see Flynn ahead of me, but only barely. He had a considerable head start, and the distance between us only grew. I turned a corner and could no longer see him in front of me, but there was no time to turn back. kept running, taking turn after turn, panting and wheezing, but there was no time to stop and breathe, no time to think, no time to feel afraid. But that's not true, is it? As my feet flew across the floor and my heart beat loudly in my chest, I did feel something, but it wasn't fear. The adrenaline was coursing through my veins, the knowledge that death was probably just a few seconds away running through my brain. And I enjoyed it. For once I felt like what I was doing had real, immediate consequences, that it mattered in a clear way. This was an adventure, and I was living it. As I turned a final corner, my heart sank. A dead end. I stared at the wall in front of me, but it did not change. Striped wallpaper as present as ever, a portrait of an old man looking back at me, nothing behind his painted eyes. Nevertheless, I stepped forward, desperate to find a way out, vainly hoping for salvation. Even as I pulled the painting from the wall, I knew it was futile, that I would need a miracle to be granted even a short respite. But still I did pull it from the wall. Honestly, I'm not sure how I knew to do that. Perhaps that seemed the only road forward, the only way this could proceed. The painting had been blocking the entrance to a vent, a large metal grating covering a hole in the wall just big enough for me to fit through. I did not hesitate. Didn't have the time to. Just grabbed the grating and yanked it, stumbling backwards as it came away more easily than I had expected. I could hear the thing closing in as I crawled into the hole. I almost felt it grasp my leg, barely grazing it before I was finally out of reach. That's how I got here. For a long while I just sat there, waiting for the being to go away. It never did. So I started recording. I said I thought I was going to die, but that wasn't true. Not really. I didn't actually think it would get me. Sure, I worried, but in the back of my mind I always knew that this wouldn't be the end. It still felt like an adventure to me, like it wasn't real, like it was just a story. And dying in a vent would be an unsatisfying ending, wouldn't it? So that couldn't be it. There had to be some twist, some change that allowed the story to continue. Even as I started recording, even as I went through the motions of being afraid for my life, that fear felt surface level, a shallow veneer of the emotion the hero, me, had to feel in that moment. But it's real, isn't it? This isn't a story. It's not an adventure, and there will be no satisfying conclusion to the plot. I'm going to die here. Even now, I'm not sure I believe it fully. Perhaps there's still some part of me that hopes that I can be saved, that clings to the belief like just believing will be enough to make it true. But I'm going to die. And there will be no thematic weight to it, no dramatic irony or character arc or satisfying conclusion. Because this is not an escapist fantasy, it's real! And in reality, none of that matters. So there you have it, listener. This is the final recording. The end. Wait. Hello?